Around this time of year is really where the trade discussion starts to heat up. We're only about a month and a half out from the March 3rd trade deadline, so today I figured I would do my annual one trade candidate from every team video, give my best guesses on some of the names that we could see moved in the near future. As always, I want to know your guys' thoughts, so if you disagree with any of my picks, be sure to let me know who you would choose for that team down below in the comments. If this is your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I set a goal to hit 100,000 subscribers in 2023, so every subscription counts. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started going in alphabetical order, starting off with the Anaheim Ducks. My choice is going to be defenseman John Klingberg. Now, Klingberg's first season with the Ducks has definitely been a struggle for him. He's an offensive defenseman, not a guy who's going to give you too much on the defensive end. He's putting up a career low this season in terms of points per game. Definitely not expecting him to fetch the Ducks that big of a return. His cap hit is definitely not ideal for the way he's performing this season, although in any Klingberg trade, I'm assuming the Ducks would retain 50%. The Arizona Coyotes, you could go a lot of different ways with this one. I'm going with Jacob Chikrin, who has been in trade rumors for it feels like 2 years now at this point. We know he's going to be traded. It's just a matter of when. The Coyotes are definitely taking their sweet time with this, and I feel like it's probably because their asking price is pretty steep, as it should be. Obviously, Chikrin is a very valuable asset, young, top 4 defenseman, and we've seen periods throughout his career where he's played like a legit number 1 defenseman. He's cost controlled on a very team-friendly contract. Whenever the Coyotes decide to deal him, they're likely going to get a sizable haul in return. The Boston Bruins are up next. This is a team where I actually did not choose a player. When you're rolling like the Bruins are, you don't want to mess things up. You don't want to shake up that roster. Obviously, they could trade prospects in any kind of deal, but they don't really have the deepest prospect pool, so I'm going with their 2023 first-round pick. With how unbelievable the team has been, and with this potentially being the last year for guys like Krejci and Bergeron, you might as well go all in, so don't be surprised to see the Bruins move this year's first rounder in a deadline deal. The Buffalo Sabres are in a really interesting spot, just 5 points back of the Pittsburgh Penguins currently for that second wildcard spot. This is a team that I'm not expecting to do a whole lot at the trade deadline. I don't think they should be buyers just yet, and I also don't expect them to sell a ton if they're still right in the thick of the wildcard hunt, which I expect them to be. The player I decided to go with is Zemgus Girgensons, veteran center on a relatively cheap cap hit, a position of need for a lot of teams. You can never have too much center depth, so maybe they could get like a mid-round pick in return for Girgensons. The Calgary Flames are another one of the teams that I couldn't choose any players for, so I'm just going to go with draft picks. Oliver Shillington would have been a candidate heading into the season, I feel like. However, Shillington hasn't played a game yet this season. He's been away from the team for personal reasons. We don't even know if he's going to play this season, so obviously you don't trade a player in that situation. Next up, we have the Carolina Hurricanes. I'm going to go with prospect Ryan Suzuki for them, first round pick, 28th overall back in 2019. Doesn't appear to be on the trajectory to make the Hurricanes roster anytime soon. Obviously, Carolina is a really deep team. They're Stanley Cup contenders this year. If they want to go ahead and make a big splash at this year's deadline, Ryan Suzuki is the type of prospect that I could definitely see them including in that kind of deal. The Chicago Blackhawks, definitely a team I fully expect to be very active leading up to the deadline in terms of selling. My pick for their trade candidate is Patrick Kane, although I could also see them moving guys like Jonathan Toews, Andreas Athanasiou, Max Domi, McCabe. Kane's the big one though. Kane's the one everybody is talking about, and if/when Kane does get dealt, it's not going to be an easy trade to facilitate. Even at 50% retained, that's still a $5 million cap that a team has to take on. There would likely have to be some money going back to Chicago in the deal, and also Kane has a no move clause, so he has the right to say no, I don't want to go there if he wants to. I'm really interested to see how this whole situation plays out. Obviously, Kane isn't having a great season for his standards, but this is a guy with winning pedigree. We know what he's capable of, and he's definitely the kind of rental that I feel like could put a team over the top. The Avalanche are up next. Really can't see them wanting to take anyone significant off of their active roster, so I'm going with their 2024 first round pick here. Not this year's first round pick, just in case. Obviously, they're still on the outside looking in terms of the playoff race. I fully expect them to get in, but if for some reason they don't, trading that first round pick could turn out to be a disaster. So that is why I went with their 2024 first rounder, just to be safe. The Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm going to go with Gustav Nyquist on this one. Also honorable mention to Vladislav Gavrikov. Nyquist is in the final year of his deal. He's set to become a UFA at season's end, has a cap of $5.5 million. Obviously, I would assume there'd be salary retention in any deal involving Nyquist. Not having a great year, but very few players on Columbus are. He's still a very useful player in my eyes, somebody who can play up and down the lineup. He's usable on both special teams. He's a player I think any team should target if they're looking for help on the wing in the middle Middle Six, teams like Toronto, Calgary. Moving on now, we have the Dallas Stars. For them, I'm going with Denis Gurianov. After scoring 20 goals 4 seasons ago in 2019-20, he really has never been able to get back to that level, has just 2 goals this season in 29 games, has oftentimes found himself watching games from the press box. This is a player that I definitely think could benefit from a change of scenery, and if the Dallas Stars want to upgrade at the deadline, I could see Gurianov going the other way in really any kind of deal. I feel like there would at least be a handful of teams out there that would be intrigued by the idea of trying to salvage Gurianov and get him back to that level he was scoring at back in 2019-20. Next up, we have the Detroit Red Wings. If they really commit to selling at the deadline, which based on the way they've played recently, I'm starting to think they should, then there's definitely a lot of options. Guys like Pius Suter, Oscar Sundqvist, Olli Mata, who are all set to become UFAs at the end of the season. However, I'm going with a bigger player, and that player is Tyler Bertuzzi, who is also set to become a UFA at the end of the season. Really haven't heard anything whatsoever in terms of contract negotiations between Bertuzzi and the Red Wings. Obviously, Bertuzzi hasn't played a ton this season. He's been out 2 separate times with wrist injuries, and when he's been in the lineup, he hasn't been playing the greatest. Definitely not as productive as he's been in the past couple of seasons. I feel like the fact that the Red Wings kind of have a logjam on the wing when they're healthy, especially after the emergence this season of guys like Elmer Soderblom and Jonathan Berggren, it kind of makes Tyler Bertuzzi expendable, and ideally this is a guy you don't want to lose for nothing. You don't just want to let him walk in free agency, so I feel like Detroit's best bet would be moving him prior to the deadline. The Edmonton Oilers, this was an easy one. It definitely has to be Jesse Puljujarvi, who has really struggled to finish this season, just 4 goals in 45 games. He was a healthy scratch in the Oilers' win last night over the Seattle Kraken. It really just feels like Puljujarvi's time is up in Edmonton, and it's time for a fresh start somewhere else. I know his numbers as a whole don't look great this season, but he always has solid underlying numbers. This is a guy who scored at a 15-plus goal pace in each of the past 2 seasons prior to this one. I really feel like if a team goes out there and buys low on Puljujarvi, it could wind up being a steal. This is a player that I really like. He's definitely better than the way he's produced this season and the way he's kind of been perceived this year as a whole. My choice for the Panthers is going to be winger Anthony Duclair, who is currently on the long-term injured reserve. However, he is set to come back, but Florida doesn't have the cap space to activate him currently, so I'm not sure where they'd be able to clear up that cap space at, so I think they can honestly just wind up trading Anthony Duclair. Hasn't played a single game yet this season, is coming off of a career-high 31 goals and 58 points last season. At just a $3 million cap hit, I think this is a guy who a ton of teams would be interested in. The Los Angeles Kings, I'm going to go with defenseman Sean Walker. The Kings kind of have a logjam on the right side, especially with Brandt Clark likely going to be knocking on the door for a roster spot going into next season, and with Sean Walker still under contract through next season, he's definitely a guy I could see the Kings trying to move to free up that roster spot, because it's definitely not going to be Matt Roy or Drew Doughty coming out. The Minnesota Wild are up next. I'm going to go with defenseman Matt Dumba. In the final year of his contract, has a cap hit of $6 million. He's a guy whose name it feels like is always brought up in trade talks like every single year, but he just never gets traded. However, this is the year that I think he actually could. Obviously, Dumba is a pretty important part of Minnesota's top 4, and they're a playoff team currently, but I can't imagine them wanting to lose Dumba for nothing, and I just don't think they're going to have the money to give him an extension, especially after they signed Boldy to that big extension. They're in a pretty unique cap situation. For the Nashville Predators, I'm going to go with defenseman Matthias Ekholm. This is a team that I definitely think should be heading in a rebuilding direction, start unloading some of those veterans and building up those future assets. I definitely think Matthias Ekholm is a strong candidate for that. He is a guy who has a great track record of being a rock-solid top 4 defenseman. I'm not sure how easy this trade would be to pull off, considering the fact that Ekholm does have a pretty big contract and he's signed through 2025-26, but if they can find a suitor for Ekholm, I definitely think they should try and cash in on his value while they still can, because he's 32 years old, right? And you never know when that drop-off is coming. Just notice I skipped over the Montreal Canadiens, so I'll do them now, and my pick is defenseman Joel Edmondson, who just embodies the kind of defenseman teams will overpay for at a trade deadline, similar to Ben Sherratt at last year's deadline, although I can't imagine they're going to get that kind of return for Edmondson, but don't be surprised if a team gives up like a second-round pick or something for him. The New Jersey Devils, obviously not a team that I expect to be sellers at the trade deadline, but if they're going to move a player off the roster, I feel like that guy would be Damon Severson. He's in the final year of his contract, and when the Devils' blue line is fully healthy, I feel like he's probably 3rd in the pecking order on the right side behind Hamilton and Marino. And then there's obviously Devils' 2nd overall pick, Simon Nemec, who's been playing really well in the AHL so far this season, so I honestly feel like we could see a scenario where Severson is moved out leading up to the deadline, and then they bring up Nemec. For the New York Islanders, I'm going to go with winger Anthony Beauvillier, who has a a cap hit of $4.15 million and is signed through next season. Beauvillier is a guy I feel like we've all kind of just been waiting for to have that big breakthrough season, and it just hasn't happened yet. It doesn't look like it's happening this season. Has had some stretches in his career, especially in the playoffs when the Islanders made those back-to-back conference finals where he looks like a legit top 6 winger. Just hasn't been able to put together that big breakthrough season, and part of me wonders if maybe the Islanders could look to move on from Beauvillier if they really look to upgrade at the deadline, maybe go out and go big and swing for a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko or something. Next up, we have the Rangers. I know a lot of people probably aren't going to like this, but I'm going with Alexis Lafreniere, the first overall pick from 2020. Obviously, up until this point, hasn't developed the way everybody expected him to and the way the Rangers hoped he would have. The trade speculation really started to heat up when he served as a healthy scratch a couple of weeks ago. Just based on the pure potential that I do think he still has, I feel like almost every team in the league would probably be interested if the Rangers do make him available. The Ottawa Senators definitely going to go with defenseman Nikita Zaitsev. It's been well known for a while now that the Ottawa Senators want to move Zaitsev's contract, and it's been reported that they are actually willing to attach a high draft pick or a prospect just to get rid of him. The Philadelphia Flyers, I'm going to go with JVR on this one, has a cap hit of $7 million and is set to become a UFA at the end of the season. He's got 19 points in 25 games this season, still a real solid offensive contributor. Obviously not the player he once was and is overpaid at this point, but I'm assuming the Flyers will be able to retain some salary, which could knock that down to as much as just $3.5 million. I think JVR would look great on a contending team's third line, getting, maybe 13, 14 minutes a night and, playing net front on the power play, which is what he does best. Next up, we have the Penguins. I'm going to go with Teddy Bluger on this one. In the final year of his deal, has a cap hit of just $2.2 million. Really solid defensive fourth line centerman, not really anything more than that. I feel like Bluger is a guy the Penguins could look to move to clear up some cap space so they could go out and try to make a splash at the deadline because they virtually have zero cap space at the moment. The San Jose Sharks, in my opinion, definitely one of the most interesting teams leading up to the deadline. Obviously, we've heard so much about Erik Karlsson, but the player I decided to go with is Timo Meier. 26-year-old winger has scored 30 or more goals in a season twice already, and he's well on his way to doing it again this season. Could even push for 40. I think this is a guy whose value is at an all-time high right now, and considering the direction of the Sharks organization, I feel like it would be smart for them to cash in on Meier's value, get a massive haul in return. The Seattle Kraken is a tough one. The majority of the guys on their roster have term left on their deals, and with how well they're playing this season, I can't imagine Seattle is going to want to break things up. So for them, I'm just going to go with picks and prospects. I can't really see them moving anyone too significant off the roster. The St. Louis Blues, a team that may very well head into this year's deadline as an unexpected seller. They're not having the season that people expected them to. I think there's a lot of names you could go with here. Vladimir Tarasenko is obviously a big one, but I'm going to go with their captain, Ryan O'Reilly. In the final year of his deal, scoring at the lowest pace this season that he scored at, really since his first couple seasons in the league with Colorado. Obviously still a very impactful two-way center, and similar to what I said about Patrick Kane, I feel like Ryan O'Reilly is the kind of rental that could really put a team over the top. For the Tampa Bay Lightning, I decided to go with defenseman Cal Foote, who this season has kind of found himself on the outside looking in terms of their top 6 on the back end. When he's been in the lineup for the majority of his career, he's put up really solid results, albeit in a very sheltered role. He's a former 14th overall pick from back in 2017. He's still only 24 years old. This is a guy who I think could definitely do a little bit more if given the opportunity, and I don't think he's going to get that in Tampa Bay. So he's definitely somebody that I could see them moving if they look to make a splash at the deadline, which they probably will because they do every year. The Maple Leafs, I'm going to go with Alexander Kerfoot. Not having a great season, especially compared to last year where he put up a career high 51 points, mostly playing exclusively on the wing on the second line. Just really hasn't been able to carve out a role for himself this season like he was last year. It's kind of been a revolving door in terms of the Leafs trying players on the second line and that left wing spot. I think that's a position they're definitely going to want to look to solidify at the trade deadline, and I think in any kind of trade like that, you're going to have to move out a decent bit of salary, and I think Kerfoot is the perfect candidate. I mean, he makes $3.5 million, and for what he's done this season, it's just not amazing value. The Vancouver Canucks is obviously going to be captain Bo Horvat, who I fully expected to be dealt at some point before the trade deadline because this is a guy Vancouver can just not risk losing for nothing in free agency, and based off of the way things have been going in Vancouver, I think if he hits free agency, he's as good as gone, and I mean, I think it's honestly ideal for the Canucks if they want to retool to cash in on Horvat and his value being at an all-time high right now. I mean, he's having a career year. Definitely one of the bigger names to watch for leading up to the trade deadline. I think the return for him is going to be huge, and whatever team trades for him is likely going to want to extend him. I don't think he's just going to wind up being being a rental anywheres. The Vegas Golden Knights, I honestly don't think they're going to do anything. Obviously, they don't have the cap space to really do anything unless they move somebody like an Alec Martinez or a Riley Smith, which I just don't think that makes sense. Vegas is having a really good season. They have a strong team. I think for the most part, they're just going to stand pat, not really make a big splash at the deadline. For the Washington Capitals, I'm going to go with Anthony Mantha. This is a guy who's really struggled this season and really over the past couple of seasons, and he was once seen as a guy after playing really well from 2017 to 2019 as like a shoe-in for 25 plus goals a season. He was seemingly just hitting his peak. He just really hasn't been able to get going in Washington. He's served as a healthy scratch, and healthy scratch in a guy who makes $5.7 million, that's definitely not ideal. So part of me wonders if the Washington Capitals are going to look to move him. Obviously, his value is not high right now at all, and I don't even know if there'd be anyone out there willing to take him on at that number based off of his performance this season, but it definitely doesn't seem like he fits into the Washington Capitals lineup, especially now that they're getting fully healthy. And now finishing out the video with the Winnipeg Jets, I'm going to go with Ville Heinola, their first round pick from the 2019 NHL draft. Seems like Heinola is kind of getting frustrated with the fact that he just hasn't been able to get any consistency in terms of where he's playing. He's always up and down between the American Hockey League and the NHL, and usually when he gets called up, he plays pretty well, but then ultimately just ends up getting sent back down when someone returns from injury. It was reported on that Heinola and his agent would like a change of scenery, so I definitely think that's something we could see happen sooner rather than later. So that is going to wrap up today's video. That was one trade candidate from every NHL team, with an exception of a few teams, of course. Like I said at the beginning, I really want to know your guys' thoughts, so if you disagreed with any of my picks, let me know who you would choose for that team down below in the comments. Also, let me know if you have any bold predictions for the trade deadline. If you guys enjoyed and you want to see more one from every team videos in the near future, then be sure to drop a like on the video. That is the best way to show your support. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year long, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all soon.